was asked to speak a little bit about my life, I guess, a journey towards compassion. I'm not sure that I've arrived at compassion yet, but I'm trying to go in that direction. And then I'll also talk a little bit about the meaning of compassion and how to live with compassion in a Buddhist context. Okay, so it always feels kind of funny for me to talk about my life because it's all in the past. So it kind of has to start with once upon a time. So as Frida mentioned, we were students together at USC. At that time, I had no intention of becoming a Buddhist monastic. Yeah. In fact, if you had told me in those days that I would be celibate, I would have told you that you were out of your mind. But, you know, our life often takes directions that we don't plan on, that we don't consider before. You know, things happen, and yeah, they happen. So after I graduated, I went traveling for about 1.5 years, and then came back and went back to a graduate school. I was always kind of wondering what the meaning of life was and what I wanted to do. And, you know, it was clear to me that the meaning of life had something to do with benefiting others. I didn't know exactly what it was, but something along that line. I grew up during the Vietnam era, which I know for some of you is back when the dinosaurs lived. But for me, it was, you know, when your age, I was watching some of my friends go off to Vietnam, and some of them come back, and some of them come back in body bags. And, you know, we were being told that we're fighting a war so that we can live in peace. And I said, excuse me, I don't understand that. How can you go and fight a war and kill people in order to live in peace? I didn't understand it. I lived at the time of the civil rights movement. You know, our USC was in the middle of a black neighborhood, and the inequality was quite apparent. And I was wondering, also as a young person, why do people judge each other based on the color of their skin? When I was in college, it was just the very beginning of the women's movement. It hadn't really taken off. But still, again, I was wondering, why do people judge other people on the basis of their gender, on the basis of what their body looked like? So I was looking at all these questions, trying to find answers, trying to find some adult that made sense. Yeah? Which was quite hard for me at the time. You know, when I would ask questions, very often the response was, you're not supposed to ask that. Now, I remember as a child asking my parents, because where we lived, coming from one direction to our house, you had to ride past Forest Hill Cemetery. So I remember as a kid, Mom and Dad, what's that? It's a cemetery. What's a cemetery? Where they put dead people. What are dead people? Silence. Yeah. Well, they go to sleep for a long time. Why do they do that? Silence. Yeah? So, you know, these kinds of questions that I really couldn't find satisfactory answers to. So as it turned out, after changing my major many times, I wound up graduating in history. And the thing I learned about history, everything else I forgot, was, my poor teachers, was that every generation in Europe, for hundreds of years, they fought a war over religion. And I thought, if religion makes people kill each other, who needs it? So I became, I think, a bit cynical. Yeah, you think I was a bit cynical? No? Well, maybe I felt inside a bit cynical, which is not a nice place to be in, but anyway, that's where I was at the time. Still kind of asking my questions, searching, seeing what I could learn. I traveled for a year and a half after college, came back, went back to school in education, thinking that I could become a teacher, because that at least had something to do with benefiting others. And then in one summer vacation, I was at Bodhi Tree Bookstore in Los Angeles. Yeah? And I saw a flyer for a Tibetan Buddhist meditation course. I knew nothing about Tibetan Buddhism. I didn't know the difference between Buddhism and Hinduism. I didn't know anything, really. But I thought, hey, it's summer vacation, let's go. So I went. And taught by two Tibetan teachers. It was very strange for me. When I first went in there, it was a 3-week retreat. And there was a man in a skirt and a woman with a shaved head. And I said, okay. They told us to meditate while we were waiting for the lamas. I had no idea what meditation was. I remember seeing people sit like this with their eyeballs rolled back. So I did that because I didn't want to look like I didn't know what I was doing, even though I didn't know what I was doing. I couldn't do that very long because it hurts your eyes. And it's also the wrong way to meditate. But one of the first things that they said in the course was, you don't need to believe anything we say. And I thought, that's nice. I'll listen. Yeah, because they said, you're intelligent people. You listen, you think about it, you test it out in your own experience, you look at it with logic and reasoning, and you make up your own mind. And I thought, that sounds good. You know, they're not going to try and cram truth down my throat, which I wouldn't have taken anyway. So I listened, and it was quite astonishing to me what they talked about, because they really talked about the functioning of our mind. And when I say mind, I don't mean brain. Okay, the brain is the physical organ. The mind is what thinks and cognizes, perceives, and experiences. Okay, how many of you have seen a dead body? Yeah? So there's a difference between a dead body and a live one, isn't there? Yeah, what's that difference? Something's missing in the dead body. What we call that is the mind, the consciousness, the awareness. Okay, so Buddhism is very much a study of the mind. People often ask if it's a religion, if it's a way of life, if it's a psychology, if it's a, kind of science. It's kind of all of those, actually. Yeah. But what really attracted me was very much the Buddhist psychology and the way of looking at our mind and, what am I thinking? What am I feeling? What am I saying, motivated by my thoughts and feelings? What am I doing, also again, motivated by my thoughts and feelings? What is my motivation when I do things? You know, nobody had ever taught me to look at that kind of thing. So I started, to really look at my mind and observe it, and especially the different mental states, the different motivations that were going on. And it was very interesting to get to know myself at that level. Buddhism talks a lot about, virtuous or wholesome mental states and non-virtuous or unwholesome mental states, how they arise, what they are, what their effects are. So I started watching that. And Buddhism also speaks a lot about how to counteract the disturbing mental states and how to nurture the very beautiful, wonderful ones. So I started, doing a meditation practice. And one of the things that really got to me was when they started talking about attachment and clinging as being an afflictive mental state, a disturbed mental state. Because I had always thought attachment, was something that would make me happy. Here I'm not thinking about attachment as it's used in psychology of a child attaching to a parent, because that's something that's very important for psychological development. Here I'm using the word attachment as the mind that exaggerates the good qualities of someone or something and wants to hold it. Look at this watch. Gorgeous. This is mine. Oh, whose food is this? It's left here. It must be for me. This is going to give me happiness. Who's this person over here who thinks that I'm so nice? Well, if they think I'm nice, I think they're nice. Yeah. And then getting attached to other people. And seeking happiness from external objects, external people. Thinking if I could only surround myself by what I like, and make everybody do what I want them to do, then I'll be happy. So I tried to do that. That's how most of us live, isn't it? We try and surround ourselves by what we find pleasant and get far away from what we find unpleasant. So we live in this constant emotional yo-yo state of I like it and I want to hang on to it, and I can't stand this, get me away from it. Okay? So I like it and I want it. It's not quite what I want, but maybe I can control it and make it what I want. Or I can make that person be what I want them to be. But then they aren't what I want them to be, or they interfere with my happiness. Get them away. So if we look, every day the mind it's really, nobody uses yo-yos anymore, do they? But you know what yo-yos are. Yeah? Up and down, and up and down, and up and down. And that's the way we are emotionally. I like it, I don't like it. I like it, I don't like it. I want it, I don't want it. And our slogan, how we live is, I want what I want when I want it. Does that sound kind of your philosophy? I want what I want when I want it. And the universe owes it to me. Why? Because unbeknownst to the rest of the universe, because they're so stupid, I happen to be the center of the universe. Yeah? So whatever I want should come my way. Whatever I don't want should get the Yeah? So we find with that kind of worldview, we're in a constant state of conflict with the environment, trying to control it, trying to control the people around us. Yeah, try and make everything be the way we want it to be. Do you know anybody who succeeded in doing that? Yeah? Do you know anybody who succeeded in making the world what they want it to be? I don't know anybody. Okay? So the Buddha talked about, instead of trying to change the world, which we can't do, we can influence the world, but we can't control it. He said, work on yourself, change yourself. Because if you change yourself and you change your own outlook, then how you experience the external world changes. So, like I said, I started looking inside myself, and I thought I was a pretty nice person. Yeah, I did well in school. My parents said they were proud of me. That was way back when. They don't, for a long time. After I became a nun, they didn't say that anymore. But anyway, as long as I did what they wanted, then they were quite happy. But you know, we have to kind of have our own values and our own principles and live by them. So I started looking inside, and what I thought was a very nice person wound up, I have quite a bit of attachment and greed, self-centeredness, anger, resentment, jealousy, arrogance, belligerence. Yeah, what I looked when I saw inside, sometimes was not such a nice person. Sometimes when we see the parts of ourselves that we don't like, we get depressed. Kind of like, oh, I'm just hopeless. That actually is another afflictive mental state. Because that's not true. Telling ourselves we're hopeless, making these extreme statements about ourselves, I'm worthless, nobody loves me. Yeah? None of that is true. When we get into one of those big self-pity states, we think it's true. But if we think clearly, we realize all of that is just garbage. Self-judgment that we're making up about ourselves that is not at all true, because we have incredible human potential. But it's covered by all this junk. So what do? So this is what really impressed me about Buddhism, is Buddhism just, it didn't say, let go of your greed or stop being angry. Because anyway, telling people what to feel doesn't work. You can't get rid of your anger by saying stop being angry. And you can't get rid of your selfishness by saying stop being selfish. It doesn't work. Yeah. We have to find other ways to look at the world, other ways to look at life in order to counteract these disturbing emotions. So that's what really appealed to me to Buddhism, was it actually taught you how to think, how to train your mind. It's a mental training, how to train your mind so that you can develop your good qualities and subdue those disturbing emotions. And I found when I practiced it, it worked. I'm not perfect. I still have all the garbage, but better than I used to be. Yeah? So, as long as it's better than before, I'm content. As long as I'm going in a good direction, that's good enough for me. Okay, it's going to take a while. It's not quick, cheap, and easy, but it'll work. So, I went to this course. Afterwards, I went to Kopan Monastery in Nepal, because in 1975, there weren't very many English-speaking temples or centers in the US. So again, I packed up all my stuff, went across the ocean while my parents are going, oh no, what's she into now? We thought she'd come back from her previous trip and settled down, and off she goes again. So I went to the monastery, and then I really, they had courses for lay people like me. I took them. I began a regular meditation practice, and, in the process of that, I decided that I wanted to ordain, to take ethical precepts. The reasons for this were many. One was I wanted to have more time and space for my meditation practice, my spiritual practice. That was becoming very important for me. Another reason was I needed to become congruent in my own ethical values. Yeah, I kind of had a double standard. I didn't like when other people lied, but it was okay for me too. I thought other people's anger was unfounded, but mine had a good reason behind it. So, I knew I had to do some changing in there and be more consistent in what I thought and, how I behaved. I asked my teacher, if I could take ordination, and he said, yes, but wait a while. Of course, I didn't want to wait a while. I wanted to do it right then. But I learned something important, which was you listen to your teacher. So I had to go back to America, and kind of clean things up here before I went back to Dharamsala and ordained. In the meantime, my parents kind of freaked out, This wasn't the career that they had planned for me. Yeah, they would have liked if I had become a doctor. That was what I was supposed to be. But didn't wind up that way. So I went back to India. India is kind of like my spiritual home. I lived with the Tibetan community in exile there. The Tibetans had their own country up until 1959. There was an abortive uprising, and then His Holiness the Dalai Lama and tens of thousands of Tibetans fled over the Himalayas into India. Prime Minister Nehru gave them asylum, and so some of them went to South India, some stayed in North India. So it was with the Tibetan community that I went to live and train. When I went over there, I kind of forgot about ever coming back to America. Because you have to remember, I grew up in the middle of Vietnam and the race riots and the gender inequity, and I was thinking, boy, this country is too much, So I never really planned to come back here. But life changes and things happen differently than you want. So I wound up coming back. The first time was to see my parents after many years, and also to go on a teaching tour. And then I came back again for another teaching tour. And at that time, a group in Seattle asked me if I would stay and be their resident teacher. And I don't work for a living. I mean, I work a lot, but I don't get paid and I don't charge. Okay, I just do what I need to do, and people support. So I asked them, if they could support me if I stayed there. And they said, well, let us think about it. And then they thought, well, it doesn't look like she eats too much. She wears the same clothes every day, no makeup, she doesn't go to movies, she doesn't have a boyfriend. Yeah, maybe we can support her. So I went to live in Seattle, and I stayed there for about 10 years. I kept going back to India for His Holiness's teachings, and then I started being invited to other countries also to teach. And then after a while, I really wanted to start a monastery, because I thought, if Buddhism is going to be rooted here, we really need a monastery. Not all Buddhists become monastics, but, there's a few of us who do. And we needed a place to live, because otherwise we were kind of getting ordained and left on our own to try and figure out how to survive. So I began Sravasti Abbey. This was in 2003. When I look back on it now, it's like a total miracle. How did this monastery come into being? Because I was a monastic. There was so I didn't have a big savings account. There was no big wealthy organization behind me. And we needed money to purchase the land and the building. And I just put out the word, and people gave. Many, many people. And most of the people just gave little a bit, whatever they could. But somehow it came to be enough to buy the land. So we have 240 acres of forest and meadowland in eastern Washington state. It's beautiful land. So I moved in there, me and my 2 cats. We were the original inhabitants of the Abbey. And then slowly other people started to come. They started to learn the Dharma. Some of my students from Seattle came. They ordained. And then the community started to grow. So I still live there and do that. But I also travel a lot, like right now, and get my fingers in all sorts of other things. Yeah. And so one of the things that I try to get my fingers into are compassionate activities. Whenever I can get involved in something that is of benefit. I think the monastery benefits people. I think a monastery acts as a conscience for society. And a monastery acts as an example. We have people write us and they say, my life is completely crazy, but it's so nice to know that you people are there generating love and compassion and transforming your minds. People write us and say that. Kind of amazing. Yeah. When I started the monastery, I wanted to do it in a way that corresponded with how they did it at the time of the Buddha. We couldn't do it exactly like that because the time of the Buddha, living in India, it's a warm climate. All the monastics went on Pindapat with their alms bowl and people gave them food, and then they did their practice. So we couldn't go in, I have some friends in another monastery. When they decided to go Pindapat in their local community, they had to get a permission from the city council for a parade. Because it was a procession of monastics one after the other. So they had to get a permit to hold a parade. Even though you're just going holding your bowl. So we didn't do it that way, but we decided that we're only going to eat food that is given to us. We're not going to go out and buy food. Yeah, we're going to make ourselves dependent on other people, because when you do that, then you really feel the kindness of other people. And when people give you food that sustains your life, then you feel responsible to do your spiritual practice, and you feel responsible to benefit those people who are keeping you alive. When I told people that this was what we were going to do, they told me I was crazy. That we live in a rural area, we will starve to death. Nobody will come out there and give us food. I said, let's try. Yeah, this is 12 years later. I haven't starved, and neither has the growing community. And it's totally amazing. You know, what you see is just the goodness in people. Just for example, in one of the early years, the Spokane newspaper did an article about the monastery. It's kind of talking about it in the religious section. And they mentioned this thing about the food. Well, a few days later, a woman who is not Buddhist comes up in an SUV full of food. She didn't know us. She read the article. She said, I want to help these people. Brought up an SUV full of food. A couple of weeks ago, again, people we don't know in California sent us about 2 boxes of almonds. The boxes were this big by this big by this big. You get an idea of how much that probably cost of almonds. They had an almond orchard in California. There's a book called Dakini Power, and the editor of that had interviewed me. You know, this woman, well, the couple had read that and said, I want to send you some almonds. Sent us 2 big boxes of almonds. You know, didn't know us at all. It's totally amazing. And so when these kinds of things happen, and they happen all the time, you really feel the kindness of sentient beings, the kindness of other living beings, and it inspires you to generate compassion and overcome selfishness. Yeah, because you realize, wow, these people work really hard, and then out of the goodness of their heart, they're giving away what they could use for themselves and their own family. But they have some appreciation for spiritual things. They want to help, they want to give. It's really very, very moving. And then especially, you know, in our practice, we meditate quite a lot about the kindness of others. It's a wonderful meditation practice, and I tell you, it really transformed my mind. She can tell you when we knew each other when I was younger. I got my PhD in complaining. Yeah, anytime you need a complaint, yeah, Complaint Factory works 25/8. I can give you one. Yeah, I can complain about anything and everything. You know, didn't appreciate things, complained a lot about my parents, complained about society, just complained, you know. And when I encountered Buddhism and started doing this reflection about the kindness of others, it made me see how totally wrong my worldview was. That we have been the recipient of kindness our entire lives. Just the fact that we are alive right now means that we've received kindness. Because when we were born, we couldn't take care of ourselves at all, could we? We couldn't feed ourselves. We couldn't even roll over. If we were cold, we couldn't cover ourselves. If we were hot, we couldn't take the blanket off. We were completely dependent on others. And they came through for us because we're still alive. When we were born, we didn't know how to communicate except to scream at the top of our lungs and wake our parents or caregivers up in the middle of the night. And they would get up in the middle of the night very happily to feed us, even though they were sleep deprived for years. We didn't know how to talk, and all sorts of people looked at us and went goo goo gaga, and we went goo goo gaga back, and somehow we learned to talk. Isn't it amazing? We were born, we could not speak. And now we know how to talk. We know how to do so many things. People gave us an education. which we didn't always appreciate. I don't know if they did it at your time, but in my time, you know, somebody would pass around a note in class, and at 10 o'clock everybody dropped their ruler together. You know, whatever we could do to bug our teachers, we did. And yet they didn't give up on us, and they continued to teach us. And our parents made us go to school and do our homework, even if we wanted to go out and play instead. Yeah. They taught us so many things. Everything we know came from others. Yeah. Even your university student, it's not that, you know, oh, I know everything myself because I'm the top of the line. We learned everything from other people. If we have talents and abilities that are really unique, it's because other people encouraged us to do those things and taught us how. Nobody was born a violinist. Yeah. Nobody was born a scholar. Nobody was born an athlete. It all comes because other people taught us and encouraged us. Yeah. Where does the food come from that we eat every day? Do you ever think about it? Like, you look at something and like, where did this come from? How many people? Yeah. I had green pepper for part of my dinner tonight. Where did this green pepper come from? Yeah. And you start tracing back, you know, not only the store, but the people who transported the pepper, the people who grew it. Yeah, the people who, did the whole thing to get one green pepper. And I not only had green peppers, I had red peppers and carrots and noodles and all sorts of stuff. So how many people and how many lives lie beyond my having one dinner? Yeah, and it all came because of the efforts and kindness of other people. Now, I'm sure somebody's going to say, but those people didn't know you. How can you say they're kind? And they didn't grow the green pepper because they wanted you to be happy. They grew the green pepper because they wanted to make money. Actually, you know, it doesn't matter. The fact of the matter is, if they hadn't put their life energy into growing that green pepper, and the noodles and the red pepper and the carrots and everything else, I wouldn't be here because I would have starved a long time ago. Yeah. We walk into this building, okay, Merle and Harold Reskin Lobby. I have no idea who those people are. Never met them. Okay? But we're sitting here in part due to their kindness. I assume they're the donors. But even more than that, even more than being the donors, who designed the building? And who was the contractor? And who are the workers who worked very hard to build this building in the heat of Chicago's summer? Yeah. Who designed the electricity and who put it in? Who made the floor? Who did the aircon system and the heating system? Who engineered the whole place? Again, we look around us, you know, we're sitting here kind of as if, well, of course I'm sitting here. But we're sitting here due to the kindness of so many other living beings who we don't even know. So I do a lot of meditation like that, and it makes me have a totally different perspective on people. Whenever I'm driving somewhere and there's people working on the road, you know how there's guys working on the road, and the traffic is blocked, and you usually say, why are you working on the road right now when I want to drive on it? There's 3 o'clock in the morning, you can work on the road then. Because we're thinking about me. I don't want to be inconvenienced. Why should I be inconvenienced when they can work in the middle of the night? As if they were my own personal slaves. So instead of thinking like that when I go past a street repairs or something, if we're going slow enough, I stop and thank them. When I see people collecting the garbage, you don't know the kindness of garbage collectors. These people are so important in our society. Whoever thinks of the kindness of the garbage collectors? What would we do without them? Can you imagine if nobody collected the garbage for even one day, what would happen? I was in Tel Aviv once when the garbage collectors went on strike. You don't want the garbage collectors to go on strike. They are very important people in our society. So now when I see people collecting the garbage, I try and stop and thank them. When I travel a lot, so I'm in airport restrooms, when I see people cleaning the toilets and the sinks, I try and thank them for what they're doing. Because my happiness depends on them. They are not my employees. They are not my slaves or my servants. Yeah, I am indebted to them for everything I have. So it's a different way of regarding people, a different way of thinking about people. Yeah. So that's one of the things that we train our minds in. And I have seen a big change in myself, or at least I've experienced a big change inside from, really thinking about, it's easy to think about the kindness of our friends. It's a little harder thinking about the kindness of strangers, but it's possible. But then also there's the kindness of people who harm us. Now you're going to think, she's totally flipped out. But think about it. Because we've all received harm, right? Yeah, we've all had our trust betrayed. We've all had people let us down. We've all had people accuse us of doing things we didn't do. We've all had people insult us and criticize us and blame us. Although we never do that to other people, do we? No, we're very nice people. It's other people that are the idiots. Right? But, when you think about it, when we face difficulties, it's an opportunity to grow in a way that we never would have grown without facing those difficulties. Because when we face difficulties, we have to look for resources. Sometimes we look for resources in our community and other people help us. Sometimes we have to develop the resources in ourselves. And we realize that we have inner qualities that we didn't even realize we had. Now, that we have qualities, we have some kind of inner strength to go through difficulties, and we didn't know we had it, and we couldn't increase it until those people came along who harmed us, who made us grow, who punctured our self-inflated attitude and made us a little bit more humble. So there's a way even really to think about the kindness of our enemies, because our enemies stretch us beyond our comfort zone. They make us grow. Yeah, we can't be complacent. So we have to thank those people because they helped us in some way. One of my teachers, one of my first teachers, Lama Yeshe, he was the one who was reborn as the Spanish child. Some of you may have heard about that. Anyway, he told us of his life in Tibet before 1959. He was born in 35, so he was in his early 20s at that time. And he was studying at Sera Monastery, one of the 3 big monasteries in Lhasa, the capital of Tibet. And he was well on his way to becoming a geshe. A geshe in the Tibetan monastic system is equivalent to like a PhD degree. So he was in the middle of doing his studies for that. And then there was an abortive uprising against the communist Chinese. When the uprising started, the monks just went into the mountains behind their monastery, taking very little with them because they thought, oh, it's just something that'll happen one day and it'll settle down and then everything will go back to normal. Well, it didn't. His Holiness the Dalai Lama fled in the middle of the night because there was danger to his life. And so there was Lama at age 24, following after the Dalai Lama, going to be a refugee in India, going from Tibet, the highest place in the world, where Mount Everest is, the highest place in the world, where there are very few bacteria and viruses, going down into the plains of India, where there's lots of bacteria and viruses, and Tibet, which was a pretty unmodern society, going down into India in those days, and then staying in a refugee camp. If you saw the movie 7 Years in Tibet, when Heinrich Herr was in the POW, a British POW camp during World War II in India, that was the one, Buksa. That's where Lama and a lot of the Tibetan refugees went. And then, slowly found a place to live. He continued his studies, continued teaching his students. And when he was telling us this story, going into more detail than what I'm telling you, and we knew, that Lama had come over the mountains, was, with nothing, dirt poor, a refugee, didn't speak English, didn't speak Hindi, only knew Tibetan, didn't have anything. And then here he is teaching this group of Westerners. And he started to say, and he put his hands together. In Buddhism, we put our hands together as a sign of respect and of greeting and of appreciation. He put his hands together and he said, I have to thank Mao Zedong, because if it wasn't for Mao Zedong, I wouldn't have been a refugee. And if I wasn't a refugee, I would not have met all of you people. And if I wasn't a refugee, I would not have had to really go deeply in my spiritual practice, because I just would have gotten my geshe degree and been very complacent and not really done anything of significance. But he said, because Mao Zedong put me in a difficult situation and made me a refugee, I had to really turn to my spiritual practice to sustain me. I had to really grow inside. And because of that, I meet this whole new world. Can you imagine that? Saying, I have to thank Mao Zedong? Yeah, if you know what Mao Zedong did in China to Tibet, and also in the Cultural Revolution to the Chinese, unspeakable how many people suffered under his reign. Unimaginable what he did. And here's Lama saying, I have to thank him. The Dalai Lama tells another story, because after there was the initial refugees, then in the Cultural Revolution, the communist government wouldn't let any more Tibetans out. Then right around 1990, they opened the gates and they let some Tibetans come out. And all the Tibetan refugees who come out, they all want to go and see the Dalai Lama because they have such reverence and devotion for him. So His Holiness tells the story of one monk coming to see him. And under the communist occupation in Tibet, they had taken monks and imprisoned them. They hadn't done anything wrong, but simply for being monks, simply for being nuns, they made them disrobe, they imprisoned them, they beat them, they tortured them. So this monk had been in a communist Chinese prison for many years, had been beaten and tortured. And His Holiness says that he asked him, what was the most difficult thing for you during all those years in prison? And the monk said, the most difficult thing for me was not to lose compassion for the guards and the people who were torturing me. He didn't say the torture was the most difficult. He said the most difficult was to not lose my compassion for these people. This is the sign of a real spiritual practitioner who's transformed their mind. Yeah. Because clearly his practice, how he survived those years in prison, was by cultivating compassion for the very people who were imprisoning him. Kind of amazing, isn't it? Yeah. So, this is when we sincerely practice and transform our mind, this is the kind of thing that could happen. And this kind of compassion, you can see he had genuine compassion. Because if you don't have genuine compassion in that kind of situation, boy, it's real easy to get angry, isn't it? Yeah, so it wasn't phony baloney. Oh yes, I love everybody, they're so sweet. It wasn't that kind of compassion. Yeah, so when we talk about compassion in Buddhism, the definition of compassion is quite simple, actually. It's simply the wish that others be free of suffering and the causes of suffering. Love is the wish for them to have happiness and the causes of happiness. Very simple definitions, but when you really think about it, the meaning is very deep. What does happiness mean? When, love, I want somebody to have happiness and the causes of happiness. What really does happiness mean? And what really are the causes of happiness? Somebody would say, oh, well, having food and friendships and a good job, that's the cause of happiness. Are you sure? I know lots of people who have food and friendship and a good job, and they aren't happy. Do you know people like that? Yeah. I've lived in some very poor countries where people have a lot of physical suffering, but I come back to this country and people have much more mental suffering here than in countries where they're very poor and they have physical suffering. It's absolutely amazing to come back to the richest country in the world where people have so much mental suffering. Because I remember when I lived in India, in the Tibetan community, India is now becoming quite modern. When I was there, in the late 70s or the 80s, 90s, really poor. Everybody was poor. But I remember some Tibetan nuns asking me, older Tibetan nuns asking me to their little hut. Their hut was made of stone, and then it had, they make these tins in India that they put ghee in. Ghee is kind of like a vegetable oil. So these big tins had been cut apart, and that formed the roof of their hut that was made out of rock. Okay, and because you needed a roof because the monsoon rains were just incredible. I mean, just like, we don't get rain here like they have in India. It's really like buckets. So they invite me back in, dirt floor, yeah, kerosene stove. They're very poor because all it was the one room, which was the bedroom, the living room, the entertainment room, the everything room. And they made me tea, and then they gave me this Tibetan kind of cookie called kapse. And I remember thinking, these people have nothing. And look what they're sharing with me. And happily, they weren't sitting there going, but if I give it away, I won't have it for myself. They were genuinely taking delight in being generous. You know? So I see that kind of attitude in the places I travel to very often. And then come back here where people have so much and sometimes very difficult to give and so much mental suffering here. Yeah, it's kind of like when you're wealthy, then you have the privilege of mental suffering. When you're poor, you're too busy trying to stay alive. You don't have the privilege of mental suffering. I mean, it's not the kind of privilege. I'm joking about that, I hope you realize. Yeah, but it's quite amazing to think about that. And then do you think about compassion, wanting others to be free of suffering? What really is suffering? Yeah, well, everybody agrees that suffering is having physical pain or mental pain. We all agree on that. Even animals know that. But what about the suffering of getting what you want but it not being good enough? Have you had that suffering? Where you've worked really hard to get something you really wanted and then it just didn't quite cut it? Okay. So, and then what about just the suffering of having a body that gets old and sick and dies without choice? Yeah. So, what does it mean to be free of suffering and its causes? And what in the world are the causes of suffering? Yes, poverty, racism, war, disease cause suffering. One level of suffering. From a Buddhist perspective, our negative actions are a cause of suffering. Our polluted motivations, our self-centered motivations are a cause of suffering. Because we talk about karma, we talk about action. Yeah, and then the question comes, well, how do you have love and compassion for everybody? Yeah, because you see, if it's love for the people we like, I mean, that's easy, isn't it? To love people that you like, who are close to you, who like you, who think you're wonderful, who give you things. Loving them is very easy. Yeah. Again, even our pet dogs and cats, yeah, they love us because we feed them. So loving your friends is not an extraordinary human quality. Yeah, if we want to be somehow different than animals, we have to learn to wish people well who aren't our friends. who are strangers, who are maybe people who harm us. Yeah? How do we do that? Well, part of it is through seeing their kindness. That's one part of it, through seeing their kindness. And I already talked about the kindness of strangers, the kindness of people who harm us. Another way of feeling love and compassion for these other people is by seeing that they're exactly like us in wanting happiness and not wanting suffering. And that we're actually exactly the same in that respect. Yeah? It's kind of humbling when you think that. When you just walk down the street and everybody you see, or you just even look around the room here, yeah, and think everybody here wants happiness and doesn't want suffering. We may have very different political views, we may have very different views on many different things, but at the basis, in our hearts, we all want happiness and not suffering. And so if we can train our mind to look at people and know that that is exactly what's in the depth of their heart, and that that's the thing that's in the depth of our heart too, then we stop feeling different from other people. We no longer feel alienated from them because we're exactly alike in a very, very important way. And then when we look at people, we can look into their hearts and we know something very important about them, no matter what they look like. Yeah? We tend to have an opinion factory, or maybe I should speak for myself. I have an opinion factory. Let me know if you have the same opinion factory. My opinion factory sits somewhere and looks at all the people who walk by and makes comments on them inside. That person walks funny. That person's clothes don't match. That person needs to lose weight. That person needs to gain weight. That person's ugly. That person's beautiful. That person looks unhappy. That person looks happy, but they look really conceited. Yeah. That person, why don't they part their hair on the other side? It doesn't look good there. Yeah. This person looks like they're a jerk. Look the way they're dressed. Nobody dresses like that. Yeah. This one's walking down the street like they're the king of the universe. Ugh. Yeah? Do you have that kind of opinion factory when you look at people? Total strangers? Yeah, right? So that opinion factory is working all the time, and it's mostly critical of other people, isn't it? Is it mostly critical, picking faults at people for tiny things, teeny, minuscule things we pick faults at? Does that make us happy? Are we happy when our mind picks at faults of other people? When all our mind does is look at other people and criticize them? Is that a happy mental state? It's not, is it? Pretty miserable mental state. And yet, look at how often and how habitually we do it. That's a suffering mental state. Okay? So instead of doing that, to be able to sit somewhere and look and say, that person wants to be happy just like me. That person wants to be free of suffering just like me. And seeing that about everybody. Doesn't matter, whether they're young or old or rich or poor or gay or straight or black or white or purple or pink or, woman or man or Martian or earthworm or dog or pig or, any living creature. Yeah, even cockroaches, even spiders. They want to be happy and not suffer. And if we can train our mind to look into everybody's heart and see that, then everywhere we go, and everyone who we're with, we feel something in common with that person. We know on some level we can connect with them due to the shared experience of being a living being who doesn't want to suffer and wants to be happy. And then on top of that, when you think that all these beings have been kind to us, that our life depends on them. It's quite curious. In America, we grow up thinking that we're independent and free. We're quite proud of that, aren't we? Yeah, I'm an independent being. I'm going to pick myself up by my own bootstraps. What if you don't have boots? Okay. So we have this kind of, I can do it on my own, but actually we can't. I think more so now than any other time in human history, we are dependent on the kindness of others. You know, a few hundred years ago, people knew how to grow their own food and how to make their own clothes and how to make a wagon to go places in. And they made their cabins. You still needed many people, but people had a diversity of skills that they could use to take care of themselves and their family and the people around them. Now we are so specialized, we don't know how to take care of ourselves. Yeah? How many of you know how to make clothes? Yeah? How many of you know how to cook? Not even half of you. It's very interesting. We have young people come to the monastery. Some of them do not know how to sweep a floor because their parents have always swept their floors and vacuumed for them. They don't know how to sweep. They don't know how to vacuum. I'm serious. Yeah? Oh, you know. Yeah? And so more than any other time in life, we are dependent on the kindness of other people. And yet, we still carry this fallacy, this fantasy that we're independent entities. Yeah. Somebody may think, well, I'm rich. I can do everything on my own. I have the money to do it. You know what? We were all born broke. Weren't we? When you came out of the womb, did you have any money? We were all born broke. We were all born with zero. And everything we have now is due to the kindness of others. Then somebody's going to say, but I worked so hard for it. Well, that's nice. But other people also work hard for you so that you can have the things that you enjoy. And isn't it kind that somebody gave you money for the efforts that you put in? And that probably you're getting paid more than the people at McDonald's who work 2, 3 jobs just trying to cover their rent. Okay? So, when we really cultivate compassion in our mind, it transforms our life a great deal. Some people think of compassion as kind of being ushy-gooey, like if you're compassionate, you're a real pushover. All you have to do is ask a compassionate person for something, and they're so compassionate they'll give it to you. Mm-mm. That's a fallacy about compassion. That's not what compassion is. Yeah? Sometimes people who act like that, they're people pleasers. But a people pleaser, the motivation of a people pleaser is to get people to like them. The motivation of a people pleaser isn't to make other people happy. So is a people pleaser really compassionate? Think about it. You know, to be really compassionate, you need to be quite strong inside. Because sometimes to be really compassionate with others, the most compassionate thing to do for somebody is to say no. Yeah? And say, figure it out. Turn it back to them, empower them to think creatively about how to solve their problem. Compassion doesn't mean babying people. It means really deeply in your heart respecting them. Last night I was giving a talk and somebody asked me, what's the difference between pity and compassion? Yeah, big difference. Actually, let me back up for a minute before I go into that. Shantideva, who is a great 8th century Indian sage, he wrote this book called Guide to a Bodhisattva's Way of Life, or Engaging in the Bodhisattva's Deed. He talked about relating to sentient beings having life, you know, other living beings, as living beings with feelings, and of helping others with the same automatic way that we help ourselves. So he gave the example of you step on a thorn, okay? So you step on a thorn, your foot hurts. Your hand goes down and pulls the thorn out. Puts the thorn down, you put your foot back, and you continue walking and the problem's solved. Yeah. The hand helps the foot automatically. It helps the foot because they're both part of the same organism. You know, let's say a human body. The hand does not go foot. You did it again. I told you to look where you were walking. You didn't look where you were walking. You stepped on another thorn. What in the world am I going to do with you? You're so stupid. And now the hand, I'm so inconvenienced. You're disrupting my whole life because now I have to reach down and pull this thorn out of you because you're so stupid and stepped on it. And I, the great and glorious hand, am doing a favor to you, the stupid inferior foot. And you remember the favor I'm doing for you because you owe me something now. Okay, that's not the way the hand does it? The hand just goes boom. That's the same way we want to help other sentient beings. That we were all part of the same organism of living beings, living life. And we help others the same way we would help ourselves. And we don't stand there and go, I'm a U.S. Senator. Excuse me, I can't resist. I'm a U.S. Senator, and I voted for you to have your food stamps. Why don't you get your life together and stop scrounging off the rest of us? Yeah? Where we don't treat other living beings like that. Where we're like the hand helping the foot. And the foot helps the hand because the hand couldn't go anywhere without the foot working. And we can't live without the kindness of other sentient beings. So when we help them, we're not great and glorious benefactors. We are simply doing our duty. His Holiness Dalai Lama says, if you want to be selfish, be wisely selfish and take care of others. Okay? Why? Well, if we don't take care of others, then we're going to live amongst a lot of unhappy people, aren't we? When you live amongst unhappy people, does that impact your life? You bet it does. Somebody in your family is unhappy, somebody in the family is getting mistreated, that affects everybody. Somebody in the community is mistreated, it affects everybody. Okay? So if we want to be happy for ourselves, we have to take care of the people around us. That's what he meant by if you want to be selfish, be wisely selfish and take care of others. And it's really true, it's really true. And this works on a personal level. If you're working together with other people, if you have an attitude of kindness, it's going to really bring out the beauty in other people. And it'll create an attitude of kindness. I read somewhere not so long ago, maybe remember the statistics, in one of those drive-by fast food places, there were over 400 people who paid for the people behind them, whatever they were born. Can you imagine that? 400 people who said, I'm going to pay for the person behind me. And the other person in front of them paid for them without them knowing it. And I'm going to pay for the person behind me. And I heard the same thing happening with kidney donations. One person needed a kidney, so somebody else gave that person a kidney, and then somebody the kidney recipient knew gave somebody else a kidney, and then somebody that person knew gave somebody else a kidney, and it went on, I think over 100 times of people giving each other. Yeah. So just this thing of, taking care of other people makes others happy, and then it helps us. And this works not only on a personal level, but it works on a community level. If one group of people is kind to another group, it improves the life of everybody. If one nation is kind to another nation, it improves the life of everybody. Yeah. But we human beings are often very stupid. Really. We think, I'm going to balm you until you come to the realization that I'm right and you're wrong, and you're going to do things my way and love me. And I'm going to balm you until you figure that out. Ridiculous, isn't it? Yeah. Totally ridiculous. You know what I've always thought? That the leaders of the countries should get in a sandbox and, like kids in kindergarten, throw sand at each other until they figured out the situation. But why are they sending the citizens of their country off to kill strangers who they don't know? This is not an acceptable way of solving conflict, in my mind. But that is another soapbox. So I better let you ask some questions now. Please. Okay, so how do I define happiness, and how do I distinguish happiness from joy? There's many different kinds of happiness, many different degrees of happiness. I think Maslow did some kind of, pyramid kind of thing about it. So there's, having our basic needs met, the happiness of that. We're social creatures, so the happiness of having companions and friends. So there's happiness that can come, in relationship to external objects and people. But I don't think that is true happiness, because all of that happiness is temporary, isn't it? The happiness of eating a good meal, it lasts for a while, and then you get hungry again. Yeah, it's nice to have good friends, but eventually we have to separate from everybody. So it's a level of happiness, but it's not the kind of happiness where we can really rest assured of long-term happiness. And I think long-term happiness comes from transforming our mind. Yeah, because as long as we have anger in our hearts, we're going to find somebody to hate. As long as we have anger, the seed of anger in us, we're going to find somebody to get angry at. Yeah, as long as we have greed and attachment in ourselves, we're going to find something to cling to want more of for ourselves than others have. So I think real happiness comes through transforming our minds so that we can let go of the anger, let go of the clinging attachment, let go of the arrogance and the jealousy and the rivalry. Yeah? I think when we have real spiritual transformation, then no matter who you go or where you're with, you have the ability to be happy. And that's where I see joy coming in. Yeah? Because to me, joy is something that comes from within, not something that comes from without. Okay, so do I ever foresee the Chinese government allowing the Dalai Lama to return to Lhasa? If the Beijing government were really smart, they would negotiate now with the Tibetans while the Dalai Lama is alive. If they were smart, they would do it now. Because His Holiness is the one that keeps telling people, don't hate them. Don't be violent. If you see, the whole Tibetan movement has been nonviolent, and any violence there has been, these self-immolations that have come about, His Holiness isn't in favor of those, but it's people's frustration that drives them to it. So if they were smart, they would negotiate now. I don't know how smart they are. Yeah? So I hope the Tibetans have a lot of hope. His Holiness have hope. But even if they were able, they're not even asking for independence. They're asking just for autonomy. But the situation now is so different in Tibet that even if they were to get autonomy, it's not going to be smooth sailing. Because now the Tibetans themselves are a minority population in their own capital. So just to realize our body's impermanence, I think in one way science itself tells us that. That atoms and molecules are moving around and buzzing around, and that all the cells in our body change every 7 years. So just even on that cellular level, things are not staying the same even in the next split second. They're different. If we could track where the electrons and things were, they're all changing moment by moment. And then look at pictures of your parents when they were young. Do you ever do that? Yeah? Is it funny to look at your parents when they were young? Yeah? And to think of your parents being children or being teenagers, and now they look so old, and they were young, and they were good looking, even though they wore all those old-fashioned clothes, you know? But now look at them, gee. Yeah? And then you start to think, you know, that's going to happen to me too. In fact, it's already happening to me. And this is one thing that's so nutty about our society, is we all think youth is fantastic and nobody's becoming younger. We idolize youth and nobody is becoming younger. Everybody's becoming older. Yeah? We're in the process of going towards, since the moment we were conceived in our mother's womb, aging started. The moment after conception, aging started. We're all getting older. We're all approaching death. Yeah? And to really think about, you know, when I die, what do I want to, what in my life will have been of value when I die? Yeah? Some people say, well, I want to build up a lot of memories. My sister says that. She says, I want to build up memories with my kids. And I think, why not just enjoy what is right now? And, you know, I'm not trying to build up memories with anybody, because I don't want to be some old lady who sits back there and just looks at photo albums and, you know, ticket stubs and goes, oh, the good old days, and has one of those things, you know, my dad had one of these, they gave him one, you know, where you put all your family pictures on and the picture comes up and then another one and then another one and then another one. I don't want to have one of those. I don't want to be an old person who just thinks about the past. I want to be an old person who has a meaningful life, even if my body's falling apart. Yeah? I want to be an old person who can, you know, I don't know if I'm going to be able to do it, but to not complain. Yeah? To not complain and to appreciate all the people who are helping me, even as I lose my independence, and I hate losing my independence, but to see the kindness of those people and not get bent out of shape. You know, because I'm aging, because I can't do what I used to do, because I can't think as clearly as I used to. Yeah? I want to be a kind old person if I live to be that old. And if I don't live to be that old, whenever it is I die, I want to dedicate whatever good things I did in this life for the benefit of others and generate a very strong intention to have love and compassion and altruism in future lives, and go on to my future life without clinging to anything in this life. Like a bird that takes off from a ship. Yeah? The bird takes off, it doesn't look back. Oh, that was a nice ship I was on, gee, maybe I should go back. The bird just goes. And I want to die and just go, but go with a heart of loving kindness and altruism. So if I want to do that, I have a lot of work to do in this life. Okay? Because that time is approaching. We're not getting younger. Good question. Okay. So I'll try and do it in 25 words or more. But not 25 minutes. Okay. Basically, we say that our human condition, the way it is now, is under the influence of ignorance, afflicted mental states like greed and clinging and anger and hatred. And karma, the actions we do motivated by those things. So karma simply means actions. It's our mental actions, what we think about, verbal actions, how we communicate, physical actions, what we do. And our actions have effects. And the effects are not only what happens in the next 5 minutes after we do the action, but based on our motivation. Our actions also have an ethical dimension to them. And so based on, if we had a good motivation or if we had a rotten one, we're creating the cause. We ourselves are creating the cause for our own happiness or suffering based on the ethical quality of the motivation of our action. So as long as we have ignorance, anger, and attachment, it's difficult to have, so many of our actions are polluted. Okay? So what we have to start out with is ethical conduct, which is the basis of the path. And it's the basis basically of all spiritual traditions. And even secular people who don't, aren't religious, ethical conduct is an important thing for not only harmony in society, but for our own internal peace. I think a lot of psychological problems come because people don't keep good ethical conduct, and so we don't feel good about ourselves. That's my theory. Not all psychological problems, but I think some of them come from that. So we need to have ethical conduct. We need to develop the ability to focus our mind and concentrate, and we need to develop wisdom. And wisdom is able, the way ignorance apprehends things, wisdom apprehends things as existing in the total opposite way. Because ignorance is a misapprehension. It's a wrong way of holding objects. And wisdom sees things as they really are, what their real nature is. So wisdom can overwhelm the ignorance in our mind stream, and thus eliminate the attachment, the anger, and so on, and the karma that creates rebirth in samsara, in this cycle of existence. And that is what's called moksha, or liberation. However, that actually isn't the final goal. For some Buddhists, it is their final goal. But for other Buddhists, it's not their final goal. Because when you see that everybody's been kind to you, and everybody wants to be happy and free of suffering as much as you do, you can't just work for your own liberation and say, I'm going to get myself out of this jam, and good luck, everybody, ciao. You can't do that, because you feel so interconnected with other living beings that, whatever benefit you get through your spiritual practice, you want to be able to share with others and to help them and to show them the way to overcome their own ignorance, anger, and attachment. And so that's what's called the bodhisattva ideal. The bodhisattva is somebody who has developed love and compassion and altruism to such an extent that whenever they see any living being, that's their response. And so they want to become fully awakened, not for their own happiness, but to be able to help others in the most effective way, and the most effective way long term, not just to solve the problems of hunger and so on, which are important problems to solve, but to solve the even deeper problem of getting born with a body like this, and getting born with a mind full of, our opinion factory and our complaint factory. to be able to overcome that. So many beings, even though they may attain their own liberation, then they come back or they re-manifest in our world in order to help the rest of us. So that's really the ultimate goal. That's what a Buddha is, somebody who can do that. And because Buddhas don't have obscuration in their mind, they know the best way to help each individual according to where that individual is at. Because it's not one size fits all when you want to help people. Yeah, you have to really take into account the individual where they're at. Okay? My definition of love is the wish for someone to have happiness and the causes of happiness. My definition of love is very different than what they sing about on the radio and what you see in movies. Yeah? Because what is on the radio and movies, they love each other, and then the next scene, they hate each other. They're fighting, isn't it? Yeah, so that's not my definition of love. Okay, I would say for a complete beginner, read some good Buddhist books. So you have to pick out the good ones, not just any Buddhist book, good ones. And then go to some centers and hear some talks, yeah, and listen to the teachings. And some people meet a tradition and a teacher that clicks with them at the very beginning. Other people have to go to a few different places, yeah. But it's really worthwhile. So between reading and getting to know the basic Buddhist tenets, and then hearing live teachings where you can really, but you have to go with a person who's good. You have to have a good teacher. Again, not just anybody. And then, where you can see somebody who's really practicing it, who can guide you. Yeah? But you can get a lot from reading books. And like we have tons of stuff on the Abbey website. Yeah, you can watch videos, you can do all sorts of things, and that's all very, very good. But I think, my own personal opinion, is that even if you do a lot of your own study and exploration, there's something different that happens when you listen to a real live human being. That doesn't happen when you watch, even when you're watching a video of a live human being. I haven't actually read a lot of them, but some of my friends have, and they really like Thomas Merton's works. I think they liked it because he was so open and receptive. He really, he knew how to have an actual interfaith dialogue. Yeah, and I think real dialogue it involves dialogue. It's not just you talk and I nod and then I talk and you nod and we all say, oh, well, at the end we all believe the same thing. I don't call that dialogue. Or you say a nice prayer, I say a nice prayer. Those things are good. We need them in society. But I think real dialogue goes beyond that. Yeah. Okay, so how to practice mindfulness despite having a handphone, despite having a smartphone. Don't have one. I'm going to tell you a secret. I might be the only person in the country who doesn't have a smartphone. And you know what? I'm happy. Can you believe that? Somebody who's happy without a smartphone. And you know what? I don't want one. Because I don't want to be available to everybody at all hours. And I don't want to burden you with telling you what I ate for breakfast. And I really don't care what you ate for breakfast. You know, I want human dialogue that has more substance to it. So I don't have a smartphone. I have a Facebook page that other people opened. I don't have the password for it. And I don't control it. Other people put all the stuff on it. Yeah, I do not have my own private Facebook page, and I do not want one. You must think I'm really nuts. Okay, so how much focusing on chakras and channels and winds and things. There is some focus on that, but not until very advanced stages. Yeah, that's a more advanced thing. And no, I don't think we're all one entity. Yeah, I don't think we're all chips off the block of one big cosmic mind. I don't think that. I think we're individual, mental continuums. But we're very related to each other. Okay?